day, my friends. It's your old pal Jordan the Lion. How are you all doing today? I hope you said great. I'm doing great, and we're gonna have a fun adventure today because we haven't went to a cemetery for a while to visit or talk about anyone, and since we're going through Florida, I thought this was a great one to talk about. This was a guy who today we're gonna visit who was the gold standard of excellence. I mean, he was an owner who called himself more of a George Patton than anything else, but his New York Yankees had the record for the most wins during the time he was the owner. His franchise had the most championships, and really it was because of him. He was a guy who demanded people to be great, and if he didn't see that, then he was the first one to call them out publicly and make a spectacle about it. So today we're gonna go visit the grave of George Steinbrenner. Daze with Jordan the Lion begins right now. We're going to a town here outside of Tampa called Trinity. George made his home in Tampa. Well, here we are, Trinity Memorial Gardens. I have not looked to see what Mr. Steinbrenner's headstone looks like, but you would imagine, being the owner of the Yankees and expecting excellence, that should be a pretty nice one. Do you two know where Mr. Steinbrenner's grave is? I'm seeing some really unique headstones out here. Take a look at some of these. He's got someone's boots and hat for their headstone. And if you look over here, this one's really special. Has the couple here embracing. Very romantic. And you can tell that they must have been, because they were wed on Valentine's Day. I'll be loving you always with a love that's true always. Irving Berlin, the song Always. Then if you come over here, look at this one. He's a boxer. Paul Moose Deschler. And this one's got Goofy on it. Okay, I did find it. I had seen that it was called the Steinbrenner Mausoleum. I figured, how many mausoleums could there be out here? That's why I didn't want to see in advance. This giant one right here, this is it. Some people call George Steinbrenner the greatest owner in sports history. His nickname was the Boss, and boy did he expect excellence. He was raised on it. I mean, that was what his whole life was based off of as a kid. Let's see if we can look at that stained glass in there. This is very cool. One of the Yankee scouts has been out here visiting Mr. Steinbrenner. Very cool. Here's the best view we can get inside at the stained glass. You can tell that Mr. Steinbrenner is right over here. There he is. George Michael Steinbrenner III. Died at 80 years old and controlled the Yankees for 38 seasons. Even though George Steinbrenner has a complicated history, he was very beloved. He was a showman, along with everything else, a perfectionist when it came to winning. His father was the president of a shipbuilding company in Ohio, and he was raised in Ohio. His father taught him, you know, everything you do, you have to be the best at it, and everything is in the details. You have to pay attention to the details. And George would say his dad would take time off, take him to Indians games, and they would go see the Indians play the Yankees, and he would always tell George, don't you dare heckle or boo the Yankees because they are the sign of excellence. So George ended up playing sports and ended up going and serving in the Air Force after he finished up with high school. He ended up going to college and was the editor on the school newspaper. He always loved sports. He was a participant in sports, and he was a really good athlete, and eventually went to Ohio State University, where he met his future beloved wife. Now, George was actually a football coach for Northwestern at one point, and he was basically a drill sergeant even then, always emphasizing winning, and just ended up not working out. So he ended up going and working for his father's company, the shipbuilding company, and then became the president of that. And then he bought into the American Basketball League's Cleveland team and owned them for a couple of years, and then eventually decided that he wanted to buy the Cleveland Indians, and he made a deal with Vernon Stouffer to purchase the Cleveland Indians with Steinbrenner being the head of the group. And right at the last minute, Vernon Stouffer decided to back out. So then George Steinbrenner got a call from CBS saying that they wanted to sell the New York Yankees, the team that he had always put on a pedestal with tradition and excellence, and now he had a chance to purchase them, and walked into the meeting, made a deal, and walked out in 1971 as the owner of the New York Yankees. Now, George immediately came in, did a press conference, and said that he was predicting that he would take his Yankees to the World Series within 3 years. And when he came in, the team was basically uncared for by CBS. They had done really nothing to build the team. There was really no winning record like they had been known for throughout their history, and nobody coming to the parks. So George Steinbrenner decided to change all that, and he was a big fan when he came in free agency. Now, George also had a problem because ended up being suspended in 1974 for illegal contributions to Richard Nixon's campaign, and he was suspended for 15 months, and then when he came back, he took the helm, firing the managers and trying to put together the best team possible, starting out with, at this time, this was kind of the birth of free agency, and Catfish Hunter had a loophole in his contract that made him available for free agency, and George Steinbrenner decided to go out and spend the money and to pick up Catfish Hunter. Then when he did that, he saw what a talent he had in Thurman Munson and knew that Thurman was a born leader. And so there hadn't been a captain since Lou Gehrig in the New York Yankees organization for the team. He decided that if manager McCarthy, who once said that no one ever deserved to be the Yankees captain after Lou Gehrig, if they ever met Thurman Munson, he would agree that Thurman deserved to be the new captain. So Thurman, against his wishes, was appointed to be the captain of the New York Yankees, took the Yankees to the World Series, and then was actually the MVP. Just going to the World Series was not enough for George Steinbrenner. George Steinbrenner wanted to win this. He, like I said, he demanded to be the winner, and he would even overstep his bounds where he would tell managers what to do. If he saw a problem with the team, he didn't wait for the local media to talk about it. He didn't wait for the manager to bring it up. He didn't wait for the other players to pressure the players that weren't performing. He went in the locker room and made it known that he saw they were not performing and that he had no problem making changes, and that would be something that he would be known for firing people constantly. He would see that he wasn't happy with the management that he had. He didn't think that his managers had the fire he wanted, and when Billy Martin got fired from the Rangers, he hired Billy Martin, brought Billy in, and even throughout their time knowing each other, I want to say friendship, but he was an employee, but they were also friends in a weird way. Every other year, it seemed like Billy was either being hired or being fired because he and Mr. Steinbrenner either couldn't get along or there was somebody that George wanted to try out instead. It was kind of a crazy relationship. To his credit, he did make the Yankees winners. He eventually got them to the World Series like he said he would. It took a little extra time, but they made it in 1976, partially because George had went out and signed up Reggie Jackson the following year after he had gotten Catfish Hunter, put Reggie as the batter behind Thurman Munson, and then the team really just took off. Problem was Billy Martin, George Steinbrenner, and Reggie Jackson at different times all could not get along between the three of them. Sometimes one would get along with the other, but there was just always an issue between them, and that would also cause Billy Martin to end up getting fired or quitting, or there being some sort of issue in the clubhouse. It always kind of seemed like it revolved around these three. And George Steinbrenner loved to have that promoted in the media because he said he knew even if the team wasn't doing good or doing well, that as long as they were being talked about in the papers, people would still want to be out buying the merchandise and be talking about the Yankees. And for him, that was the most important thing, was for everyone to know who the New York Yankees were, and for them to be associated with that tradition and winning they always had been. So they finally won the 1977 World Series, they won the 78 World Series, and then in 79, George Brett hit a home run that George Steinbrenner would never forget, never let him forget, and held a grudge against George Brett for most of his life because of it. Mr. Steinbrenner just said he expected his teams to win, and when they didn't, he just couldn't handle it. So when they didn't win the World Series, he decided to go after another hot free agent, which was Dave Winfield. Now, apparently when Dave Winfield came in, he had the highest salary, the highest contract of any Major League Baseball player of all time. And apparently there was something in there that George Steinbrenner just didn't understand about the contract and decided that he wanted to change the contract. He didn't think that Dave Winfield was performing. He didn't think that he deserved the money. And Dave Winfield said, I was a team guy. You know, I wanted to be there for the 10 years of my contract, so I restructured the deal, losing money to stay there. And anytime the Yankees weren't doing well, even though they would always have a winning record for like the entire 80s, even though they wouldn't win World Series throughout that entire time for like 13 years, they would always have a winning record, but that wasn't enough. And so it was actually in 1991, George Steinbrenner was banned from baseball because they found that he was paying a gambler for information about Dave Winfield, and was going to use it against Dave Winfield because they had a feud. And so George Steinbrenner was told he was banned from baseball for life, and then 3 years later was allowed to come back. The Yankees had a winning season. They were looking like they were going to win the World Series, and then baseball went on strike. Now, even though George Steinbrenner was known as kind of like a pattern as an owner and sometimes overstepped his bounds, he was also known for being a guy who loved people. And he saw the humor in the things he did. Like, he knew that he was over the top and everything, but he also wanted to give people the benefit of the doubt. And so he spent a lot of his money, a lot of his resources helping people, donating to good causes, donating to the Bronx, donating all over Tampa. And one of the other great things he did was there were players who were deemed as a problem because they had drug issues in the past, and some teams didn't want to give those guys second chances, but George Steinbrenner would. He would give people like Dwight Gooden and Darryl Strawberry a second chance, and those players would end up taking his teams to World Series championships. Now, they say that George Steinbrenner, on top of everything else, being a proud Yankee owner and everything, he once even said owning the Yankees was the equivalent of owning the Mona Lisa. They said on top of everything else, he was a patriot. And when 9/11 happened of 2001, he immediately made Yankee Stadium available to people to come and mourn, for them to hold events, to bring people together. He was that guy. And he said, you know what, that's just the kind of town, and that's what the Yankees should represent. Even when Thurman Munson ended up passing away in a plane crash, I guess Thurman was training to be a pilot, and at the Canton airport his plane crashed. George Steinbrenner immediately was heartbroken and broke it to the team, but then started making arrangements for the entire team to go to the funeral. And Major League Baseball had kind of stepped in and said, you know, we don't know if that's a good idea because you might not make it back in time for the game. And George Steinbrenner said, well, then we don't make it back for the game and we forfeit. What's the big deal? This is our captain we're talking about here. At the time of George Steinbrenner's death, he ended up passing away at the age of 80 years old. He had put into motion in the 2000s that he wanted to build a new Yankee Stadium. This, to him, was a gift to the Yankee fans, and he wanted to give them something new. Wasn't that they didn't respect the house that Ruth built, but the house that Ruth built was falling apart. And so they ended up putting together a plan for a new stadium. He mortgaged basically his assets for the team to be able to build it, and they broke ground in 2006. They played their last season, the Yankees played their last season in the stadium in 2008 and had the All-Star game there and then shut it all down. Now in 2009, when they opened the new park that they would all affectionately call the house that George built, as in George Steinbrenner, the Yankees would end up winning the World Series in 2009. And then when Mr. Steinbrenner passed away in 2010, around the All-Star game, the Yankees were in first place at the time of his death. And so a lot of the players said, we were just happy that for him to go, that he got a World Series victory in the end, and that we were in first place on his way out. But there are numerous, I've noticed in the different trips that I've made to Florida, especially Tampa area, there are stadiums named after him in high schools and wings of hospitals. He was, like I said, a major humanitarian, and also had a massive love for horse training, and it was always his dream to produce a horse that would win the Kentucky Derby in his lifetime. I don't believe that he ever did, but he did leave a lasting legacy for the Yankees, and never changing their uniform, never, you know, they changed the logo occasionally in the 80s for like baseball cards and stuff for the Yankees, but they never changed their uniforms. They were always the NY pinstripes, and to this day, they're still a winning franchise. In fact, I believe they're still the most winning franchise in sports history. It's a real testament to Mr. Steinbrenner that so many of the players, when I was looking into finding out information about him, it's amazing how many players said, on top of everything else, they considered him a friend. They said he was the boss, he was the owner, he was everything, but he was a friend. He was a good guy, and he was a guy that cared about people. And if he found out people needed something, or if he knew that there was something wrong, he always made it a point to step in. And I just kind of wonder, as an Ohio person, knowing the long history that the Cleveland Indians have had without winning championships, what would have been had George Steinbrenner been able to purchase the Cleveland Indians instead of purchasing the New York Yankees. But I guess we will never know. It was also said that when Seinfeld would mock him by having him portrayed on their show, he loved it. He thought it was hilarious, and he was the first person to find humor in himself. Well, alright my friends, we're going to call it a day. Thank you Brian Villers for becoming my newest Patreon. Thank you all for watching. Thank you Mr. Steinbrenner for, even though I did not grow up a Yankees fan, I love Babe Ruth and I love the history of the Yankees. I love that he kept that as the foremost thought, was the tradition of the Yankees, having a team out there that is known for excellence, known for going above and beyond. Even though I know a lot of people feel like, hey, he changed the game the way I didn't like, with the free agency and buying players and everything. But his thought was that, hey, if I'm willing to pay him, some other team's willing to pay him as well. So thank you for watching. Thank you all for subscribing. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. Please hit the like button and ring the bell for notifications. We will see you all next time. Have a great night and goodbye.